My worst fear moving to Japan was driving. In Canada, we drive on the other side of the road, the other side of the car, and the other side of the world. So I knew if I was to drive properly, I would need to rewire my brain. I was also scared of unknown traffic signals, getting lost, gassing up, and car maintenance. Also, I was terrified of a breakdown, or worse, a car accident. How would I deal with these situations, especially because I can't speak Japanese? These are reasonable fears to have about driving in a foreign country, and after living and working in Japan for over a year, I can say there are certainly driving challenges. Fortunately, I have not had an accident yet, but I did have a breakdown on a highway in the middle of a tunnel, so I can recount that experience. I bought an older vehicle, and older cars have a tendency to use more motor oil than new ones. So if a person is frequently driving, it's a good idea to check the oil before a road trip. I did not do this. I did have my oil changed only 2 months prior, but that did not save me in this situation. On a road trip to Hiroshima, on my drive back, disaster struck. In the middle of a tunnel, my car started to shake. The engine revved and something inside the engine broke with a crunching and smashing of metal. I began to decelerate rapidly and the engine started smoking. I was panicked, so I pulled off and thankfully managed to get my car off the main tunnel highway and into a relatively safe, small outcrop. Shaking, I called my supervisor and explained that I was in a little bit of trouble. Thankfully, in Japan, there are highway patrolmen that aren't police that will set up emergency lights and offer some assistance in an emergency situation. I was able to pass my phone back and forth between these men and my supervisor. My roadside assistance is JAF, or GAF. They have a number you can call if you have trouble driving around. Also, they will tow your vehicle. They have an English operator, but my supervisor talked to them for me, and had a tow truck come for my car. However, apparently it's against the law to ride with a tow truck driver in Japan, so he could only take me outside the tunnel. I was forced to wait at a toll station for my supervisor to come rescue me. What a pain. I waited 3 hours for a tow truck to be called, an hour for it to arrive, and another 2 hours on the side of the road for a rescue. It was not much fun. So, perhaps if you ever drive in Japan and break down, your experience might be the same. I was incredibly lucky to find a small pull-off and that those highway patrolmen came to my aid. Otherwise, the situation would have been much more difficult. City driving is especially challenging. It's busy because there's a lot going on around you, and you must pay attention. The worst part, in my opinion, is the mopeds and the bikes on the road. They're hard to spot, usually drive in your blind spot on the left-hand side, and like to creep up behind you. As a rule, I always shoulder check to make sure I don't wipe out a biker. My hatred of mopeds extends past the city though. When you're driving on a highway, they like to take up a significant portion of the road and drive slow. So following them takes forever, and driving around them is taking your life in your hands. In Japan, younger people and people who can't afford a car or a driver's license may choose to drive a moped, but I don't think it's a safe alternative. I think it's dangerous. Rant over. Back to city driving. I've yet to see a traffic circle, which is just as well because I already struggle to wrap my brain around them back home. Instead, stoplights and stop signs are king in Japan. I've noticed streets or corners that desperately need traffic control but don't have any. They are crazy busy, and trying to turn onto such a road is a true test of patience. Outside of that, in the city, if you get yourself into a residential area, the streets can be a tight labyrinth to navigate. Thankfully, mirrors are set up at blind corners, but not always. Taking it slow and being patient is the name of the game, but that's always the case when driving. Driving in the countryside is much better. It's less chaotic and generally more beautiful. The highways are sometimes tolled, but they are fast, well maintained, and have good rest stops. Paying toll roads sounds a lot scarier than it is. If you don't have an IC card, which automatically pays for you, you can drive up to the spot signed with -kanji. Sometimes you take a slip and pay a machine when you leave, sometimes you take a slip and pay a man or a woman at a booth, and sometimes you pay once going onto a highway and that's it. Just keep the slip and keep your wallet full, and you won't have a problem. Same rule applies to life. Highway speed is usually around 70 kilometers, but everyone drives 80 to 90 if not faster. Some highways are faster or slower depending on. General country roads have a limit of 50 kilometers, but surprise, everyone drives at least 60. It's also very rare for Japanese roads to have more than 2 lanes going in either direction, except in cities and towns. Roads far off the beaten path are where things get difficult. The space between 2 lanes of traffic becomes blurred, and sometimes you must pull over to let someone else pass you from the opposite direction. These tight roads are not very enjoyable as they require intense focus. You must pay very close attention around corners, otherwise you'll crash into someone. Also, I've had instances where I literally had to reverse to find a patch of road with enough space to allow me to pass someone. Also in the Japanese countryside, construction work is a popular thing, and it's just as annoying as it is back in Canada. My supervisor said that construction companies must use up their funding by the end of the year in order to get more funding for the next year. So, around November, December, a lot of unnecessary and annoying construction projects begin. The red flag means stop, the white flag means go, the yellow cones mean drive kinda slow. Now to talk about the infamous driving test. As a Canadian, when my international driver's license expired, I applied for a Japanese driver's license without having to take the dreaded Japanese driving test, but my fellow American ALTs were not so lucky. The paperwork is annoying enough to assemble, but the driving test is notorious as one of the hardest in the world. Many Japanese people spend months studying and practicing for the test, and the mandatory course takes thousands of dollars. Thankfully, the standard isn't held for foreigners, but unless your government has a deal, you still gotta take the test. In my opinion, some of what the test requires is redundant, and actually, some practices probably serve to distract the driver more than anything, as the driver is paying more attention to their own behavior instead of the road and the cars around them. But, c'est la vie. I never had the pleasure to experience the test. This is just what I've gathered as a second-hand account. Gassing up in Japan might be intimidating, but it's not so bad, as long as you don't accidentally fill up with diesel fuel like I did. When you pull up to a pump, you press the cash or card on the screen, insert your money into the proper slot, select the type of fuel, make sure it's red, which is regular, then gas up. When finished, the pump will give you change, or it will give you a receipt you can take around to the side of the pumps that will make change. I didn't know this, but many Japanese cars have a lever on the driver's side of the floor that you have to pull up to unlock the gas flap. So, pop that sucker up. At some gas stations, the staff will come clean your windows and fill up for you, which is nice. Also, almost all stations come equipped with a bathroom and a small lounge should you need it. The downside is gas stations are only open during business hours, and many do not offer 24-hour service. So, if you're planning on driving late at night or early morning, make sure you got a full tank. Parking is a bit annoying. It's rare, especially in the city, that you'll be able to park in front of someone's house or at your target destination downtown. Parking in a public or paid lot and walking is frequently your only option, sometimes even in the countryside. It's important to get this right. You don't want to get a ticket, or worse, get towed. There are some strange quirks in Japanese traffic too. At very, very certain stop signs, you can go straight or turn on a red light, when there are no green turning arrows to indicate you can go. It's super rare, but I've encountered 2 such stoplights before, and I was so confused when people were pulling around past me. Thankfully, for the most part, Japanese drivers are kind and patient. In both instances, I didn't even get honked at. I think that's enough of my rambling about driving in Japan. Hopefully this quells your fears, or realizes them for you. Either way, don't be afraid to do something just because you're scared of it. Driving around Japan while jamming to tunes is now one of my favorite things to do. Take care and be bold.